Hello from Memphis, Tennessee, somewhere near the middle of the country on the banks of the Mississippi. Thank you for anyone who's returning visitor to our webinars, and welcome to all of you joining for the first time. I'm going to turn off my camera now. I can figure out how. Save bandwidth. There we go. So I'd like to start by acknowledging some of the funders and some of the projects you'll be looking at. The primary one you're seeing there is for developing web-based assessments, and you'll see an opportunity, you'll see a little bit of an intro to it, reading diagnostic and progress monitoring instrument that's freely available to you through the sponsorship of the IES and support of CAPTI. IES being the Institute for Education Sciences, a branch of the research branch of the Department of Education. They've also funded us to do a reading comprehension instruction online system that you also will have free access to, and is also available now and is appropriate for assuredly for level 3 and 4 adult literacy learners. So I will actually demo a little bit of that since it's relevant to this particular topic a little later on in the session. And I welcome you to visit our website, and you'll be in contact with Hallie, who's listening in, who will set you all up to provide the service for your teachers, if you're a teacher, for your students. And a quick acknowledgement to some, but not all, of our many collaborators and supporters in this project and sponsor. So for those of you who are veterans here, you'll see a little bit of familiarity with the structure that we're going to go through. We'll start by identifying several subpopulations and how we think they might respond to different instruction. Then we'll talk a little bit about assessing and diagnosing their reading literacy skills of learners, and how to use the Sarah battery to do so, and what to expect and how to interpret, at least a brief little bit on that. Welcome either questions or follow-up, and we can provide much more detailed information. And then we'll go ahead and switch to looking at the descriptors for this level and some research-based tips and techniques. Actually, 2 of them we're going to focus on that sort of consolidate a lot of the work, including the AutoTutor system that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so here's our rough breakdown of the approximate grade equivalent levels for the different English educational functioning levels. As I've emphasized throughout these presentations, there's really quite a soft boundaries between all of these. There's some students are higher in some and lower in other skills. So, but it definitely gives you a rough estimation. So the 3 types of subpopulations I'd like to highlight are, first, those who simply have had inadequate school experiences with reading instruction. There are so many reasons that could have occurred. Age, older school systems, quality of that school system, but often it could be individual reasons. It could have been behavior as a youth. It could have been outside forces. It doesn't matter. The thing is that there's a gap there in terms of their skills, but there's no underlying reasons why there shouldn't be adequate progress once you start reintroducing good instruction, quality instruction, science-based instruction. For English language learners, it's one of the variables is whether they've had a good deal of education in their, if they were from another country in their origin country, if they're simply second language learners here, again, the quality of their schooling. And here you expect to see steady, continuous growth with practice. Again, the more educated they are in in a first language, the more that will support them in their English language learning. And especially at this level, the one I added here was that, you know, the culture and the idiomatic use of the language varies in every language. So you have to get used to that. And as native speakers, we often are not fully conscious or aware until our English language learners start pointing out to us that phrase I've used elsewhere, when you're watching a football game, if they ice the kicker, there's no frozen activity going on. It's simply a cliche or a metaphor for calling a timeout before the person kicks a field goal. So things like that that are culturally specific can be very confusing, as well as the sort of complexity of the way we write and use our grammar. Those things can trip up individuals who otherwise seem like they're understanding quite well. And although I think this is true for all the subgroups, I think working across reading, writing, speaking, and listening, all of your instruction, even if it's reading instruction, is always useful and important. Reading is a part of language, so it should be always emphasized, all the different dimensions. And you may very well have learners who either have reading disabilities or learning disabilities. Those may or may not have been diagnosed. And so you expect slower progress, more direct instruction, more practice to make gains. But again, there's no reason, there's no evidence that those gains won't come over time. They just, unfortunately for those individuals, require more effort and more work to get there, and more patience from you. So if you want to read a little bit more of the scientific base and empirical findings about adult learners, I can recommend this entire handbook that came out in the last year. And we have a chapter in the beginning talking about not only the challenges I just mentioned, but more simple and very important things like visual acuity. If an individual has uncorrected vision, especially if they're getting older like myself, that's going to interfere with their reading and their comprehension. And because they have less experience, they may not realize the impact it's having. Hearing, same issue. If your loss of hearing can affect your reading, your understanding of language. So these are various things that can interact with your instructional uptake. Also want to recommend this is a free resource you can download off of the web. It's the sort of culminating report of a large initiative that I participated in. It was K through 12, but a lot of the work developed there, especially for adolescents and adult struggling readers, will be perfectly applicable to adults. And several of the insights from there we are adapting in our instruction and our projects for adult learners. So I can recommend this source to you. So let's move on to assessment. The Sarah Reading Battery was developed by myself and some colleagues over many, many years. It started with adults. Then we moved in the project I just mentioned to look at its utility across grades 3 through 12 for readers who were starting to struggle or fall behind grade level expectations. And then we re-adapted it through the project I saw for adults, and that's the work we're engaged in now. I want to emphasize again that this is freely provided both through the support of CAPTI and through the Department of Education, and we are engaged in a research project. So while it's a sort of voluntary that you offer it to students, and I know it's an assessment, it would be greatly appreciated for our research project for the field of adult literacy if you have eligible learners that you follow up afterwards at our website, and you'll get a free account and instructions on how to use it and the ability to use this and get immediate results for your learners on their reading levels. And this can happen, we recommend at the beginning, not the first thing, but at the beginning, whether you have to use a accountability instrument such as the TABE or the CASIS, you would use it in addition to If you feel like the student, you don't know the level of the student for placement and you want to use it before those, can help you to better place and better prepare them for these formalized standard assessments. Or after you've had the TABE administered, you'll see in the parts that I show next, it'll give you guidance as to which and how many of the subtests in this you should give in one or more sessions. Again, because it's a research project, we are strongly encouraging the administration as much as you can, because the results are going to help us to norm and tailor and make sure that all the scales work well for adult literacy learners. And you can use it repeatedly through their progress through the program to measure and monitor gain and improvement on all the subskills, including reading comprehension. So these are the 6 subtests. And again, for a learner who is at level 3 or 4, they can take the entire battery. Again, the time it takes, each of the first 4 subtests take no more than 10 minutes per to complete. Less, the higher your ability. You'll see in a moment, they're very quick and easy items to complete. We usually start, if we have no other information, at the medium or intermediate level. And then what I'm recommending is that if you have a learner that scores at the high end on all the subtests at the medium level, that you request that they, within a certain amount of time, 1 to 2 weeks, take again at the challenge level. That'll be good to support them, and that'll assure you that there's no underlying foundational skill weaknesses that might interfere with their instruction as they move forward. We get a lot of comment from instructors saying that they have individuals at a GED or HiSET level that they're trying to prepare, and they just don't seem to be able to get there. And this is a great test to find out if there's an underlying foundational skill issue that's really impeding their progress and uptake of good instruction at that level. This is, a rough estimate. Again, as you all know, that individuals that are adults get to choose how much time and effort they put into things. And I think what we tend to define as for adolescents is they always completed the entire battery in 30, 40 minutes. Adolescents don't have time to spend on tests. Adult learners sometimes get engaged more deeply. They spend more time. They may be older or slower. So it varies a lot more about how much time it takes. And it's really between you and that learner whether that, how much time they choose to spend at a particular session. As you see here at the level 4, I would expect they could go through the entire battery in a single session, maybe a second session in under 40 minutes most of the time. But again, it really varies. An English language learner usually spends more time. Those with a reading disability, even if they've compensated some, they tend to be slower. So as I said also, that I am recommending for those who score high on the scales, that's above 260, 270 on average across each of the 6 subtests, that they then take the challenge level, the high level. And that would that'll be good for our research, about the test retest kind of information that we need to make sure that the items and scales are working, and good for you and for them to assure you that there's no underlying skill deficits interfering with them making progress. You do not, So again, there's very straightforward design, simple, quick items, almost game. They're not fun, but they're almost game-like. You do an item, synonyms for vocabulary, as well as you saw, semantic associate, forest for the trees, important when you're learning topical vocabulary in an area. Morphological, prefixes, suffixes, affixes, those are supposed to affect meaning and syntax. So very predictive of learning gain and good for building vocabulary. Sentence tasks that look at discourse and logical connectors. These are important for building up meaning across a informational text in particular, as well as in writing. These are supportive of how you write both persuasive arguments. We'll talk about writing a little bit later too. This test sort of has you read things at a regular rate for just the gist and make sure that you're reading at an appropriate rate to handle a lot of content and a lot of text, that you're fluent. And then a traditional comprehension measure that looks at both inferential and literal understanding within a passage. So I'd like to now move on to the instructing part. Again, going back to our sort of levels look, I've given rough targets to where I think the primary focus of instruction should be, given the level, the primary level of the student. And here I've just graded out a little bit that, you know, again, especially if you have an individual with learning disabilities or reading disabilities or an English language learner, I hate to even neglect even the bottom one, because decoding and learning complex words is going to be important at every level of your reading. It's just that it may be less of a direct instruction target and more of a implicit check-on kind of instruction. Last seminar, I really emphasized the idea of reading widely and therefore reading fluently and therefore getting very familiar and confident when you're reading texts and making it habitual. And then I also tried to focus a little bit more on learning the different text structures across different genres, cause and effect, compare, contrast, and the kinds of terms that support that. And those are very important at low intermediate. And what we're going to focus on here is a little bit more on that reading to learn and think, that sort of level that you usually do get to in good middle school literacy instruction as preparation for high school content and disciplinary learning. So it kind of bridges. But it's important here to remember that the level 3 and the level 4 here really do, there's no boundary there. They overlap, and you're going to see pockets of strength and weakness. And so, and that's going to be reflected actually in the way that the functioning level descriptors are written. Again, this is a good volume to look at all time. It looks at evidence-based review of reading, works its way through all the different levels of foundational skills. And I pulled from this particular source to get my levels descriptors, and I'm repeating from last time the solid block of text that they provide to you to put these descriptors. And I'm going to show you that was the level 3, and the level 4 pretty much looks the same without reading it. And if you read it in detail, you actually find out that all they've really done is elaborated and made more sophisticated the same subskills. And that makes sense for reading. You know, you're getting closer and deeper, but the same issues apply. So, you know, here they talked about word learning, but here they talk about the impact of specific word choices. They talked about reading in science and history, and here they talk about primary and secondary sources and technical texts. In level 3, they talked about connections among ideas. Here they really played that out about major sections, kind of implying that there's multiple sources and so forth. So everything at level 3 is essentially repeated at level 4, except at a deeper, more sophisticated, more detailed level. So that's what I'm going to kind of highlight here in these sort of transition from 3 to 4. So all the way back down to the word level. I mean, as we as adults continue to refine our word learning, word recognition, word decoding skills across our lifetime, as an adult, we're getting more words from foreign borrowings and how to handle them, not as a sort of decoding task, but understanding how different languages represent things. And you know, we have to learn to sort of get used to things. By the way, for any of you who may be unfamiliar with the visual form of these words, I've got cacciatore, bourgeoisie, zeitgeist, morphology. It's really interesting when you're dealing with foreign borrowings. You almost have to blink out your typical letter by letter decoding because they would never get you there. You have to remember how the word sounds, which is why I'm emphasizing reading aloud or listening aloud, because again, you don't always get to the pronunciations of complex adult words without having heard them. Morphology, very, very important always. But here you're accumulating knowledge. It's not just the skill and technique of noticing them, being aware of them. It's actually becoming they're part of they're in your head. There's knowledge of these different endings and beginnings, especially in technical fields and academic fields. I always point out hydrochlorothiazide because that's my blood pressure medicine, and it took me probably over a year myself to sit down and focus on all the parts and make sure I could say it out loud. And in case a doctor asked me, what medications are you on? Because I couldn't, without the parts, it was hard to remember what the word was. For vocabulary, oops, so I jumped ahead a little bit there. Again, you're sort of moving into a new level of sophistication, figurative and non-literal words. Polygamous, multiple meaning words, and specialized meanings. Like you can generally know you go on a circuit, or you can talk about an electrical circuit, which has a specific definition. Reliability is a technical term, and measurement. It's also just that somebody's reliable. So recognizing when you're reading that words can be used in special ways in special contexts is very important at this level, so that you don't simply rely on your general knowledge when it's not appropriate. And of course, there's many more of these words that the individual words don't actually cue the meaning. Field and goal. I mean, in soccer, there's a field and there's a goal, but in football, there's a field goal and it's a 3-point kick. And I gave some other little examples there. So you're still learning vocabulary. It sometimes turns out that they're multi-word vocabulary. And again, I think the issue with reading fluency here is you're going to keep getting harder and harder, longer and longer, more challenging texts. And what you have to learn is to not be afraid of those, not to give up on those. You can yawn, but you need the stamina and persistence to really work through challenging longer texts. With respect to comprehension strategies, again, these are all the sort of level 3 ones that you pick up into sophistication as you go along. And thank you. One of the things you want to do is make sure that you take advantage of individuals who have background knowledge in certain areas, because that's going to help them to handle more complex reading and text, because they'll know the terms, they'll know the structures, and it helps them to understand things better. So you can try more difficult things with people who have some background knowledge, and maybe preparing them with a little bit of that helps. And again, individuals will be, more engaged and more willing to face challenge, when they either are interested in it or it's important and relevant to their own goals and needs. And so now I'm going to sort of repeat and look at these, really level 4, level 5, GED preparation sets of skills. And these are the state of the art of thinking about reading in the 21st century. A lot of research is being put into these now, both for school-aged readers, but also college readers. It's the demand we're all under as we make progress in moving in and out of higher education, moving in and out of professional training and certification, because you can think of disciplinary as being industry or workplace specific, and you can also think of this as getting promotions within your career paths. So it is good practice as disciplinary. So it's interesting that you may not be doing science anymore or history, but those focuses are important. So you can develop the skills by using those kinds of content. And of course, we live in this multiple source, multiple media literacy world. And that's where we're getting all our readings and materials from. So it's very important to sort of, as much as possible, use that as your source material. Recognize that it's not just reading, it's print and media, mixes of those. And that you're always using text and literacy to solve problems, not just to build knowledge, not just to understand. And again, so the more applied it is, the more valuable it is, and you get the same skill benefit that you get from sort of just reading a text generically. So putting things in, and I'm going to show you a couple examples of how you might put the content into a much more relevance or problem solving or discussion topic kind of point of view. And as you see here, conceptual and social reasoning. Now, again, if you go to this particular source I gave, this actually represents a framework we've put together in some of our writings about the different kind of levels of reading development. And although these cover all levels, in the area, in the area we've done in other webinars, we've focused more on these. And in this webinar, I'm pushing you towards, really stressing both the thinking conceptual level and the social model and perspective taking level. And this is another graphic that I've repeated in other sessions. And as it's basically pointing out that you're always mixing these different foundational skills in your instruction, but you're pushing more and more towards both vocabulary building and comprehension strategies as you get towards level 4. And I've mentioned before the use of listening. And here, I think of the listening as being valuable, especially when you're reading stretch materials, college level, advanced materials, vocabulary you maybe never heard before. And it's still important to have listening opportunities. And again, Captive Voice is one of the text-to-speech services that can help you to put in materials you want to help learners to sort of have both, the visual reading, but when that's overly challenging, to also get the content through listening. So I'm going to pause just a moment. I tried to stop jumping around. I always get excited during these talks, and apparently that affects the quality of the audio. So I've tried to be more still. But are there any questions or comments you'd like me to answer before I?
Is this assessment for English learners or for EFL level 4 in ABE and ESL?
It should be appropriate for both populations across all the levels. The content, the theoretical and the content models are what they'd call psycholinguistic. And in fact, even the morphology test itself was derived from one originally designed for English language learners. The interpretation might be slightly different for the same score. So for example, one would anticipate that a native speaker has been exposed to certain kinds of terms and structures grammatically and syntactically, but may never have spent time focusing and learning to process them well. Whereas an English language learner may never have been exposed to that syntax or that vocabulary before. So even though there's different causes or reasons for the performance, and those influence the way one makes decisions about the next instructional step, the score itself is valid for both, just with these, understanding of the learner in front of you. So we strongly encourage both groups to use it, and for you to provide to us, as we will request, an indicator about whether this was an English language learner or not. And that will help us when we give you feedback on the performances to help you make interpretations that make most sense for those learners. Okay, I'm going to move on now. This diagram represents the notion that two things are coming together when you do reading: the printed word recognition and the sub skills that go into that, and all the more advanced levels of language comprehension that you apply both when listening and reading and writing, and how hopefully by level 4 you don't even notice that you're doing all these underlying word recognition skills. Your brain is computing these things automatically and building new knowledge and new skills, but you're not focusing your instruction on them for the learners. And the others are being applied strategically when needed, as needed. Since not every reading purpose demands every single sub-skill, you have to be sort of implicitly sometimes or explicitly deciding which sets of skills to apply given your reading. As you're developing, these are kind of all treated as separate little strands that you might have to do direct instruction and practice on. But as you get into these levels, they're starting to come together so that you can sort of focus on a more general set of things, and hopefully the underlying skills will develop along the way. And of course, as you get towards the top end, you sort of just treat this all as if they're all intertwined. And so we're, of course, working now with the transition from level 3 to 4. So hopefully the underlying word recognition skills are being strengthened as part of the exercises we're doing at other levels. So let's close out on comprehension strategies. Now, as you recall, I had like 7 different categories of comprehension. There was these text genre structures, there was disciplinary reading, there was that you can imagine that happening across literary and informational texts, and persuasive texts. There was multimedia and the internet, and still underlying lexical word part skills. So how do you handle all this? Well, one way is with the empirically science-based system we're building for online reading. We call it AutoTutor, and that's because it is an intelligent tutoring system that uses conversational agents to promote modern literacy skills. And I'll show you a little bit about what we mean by that in just the next couple slides, very briefly. As you can see here, there are 30 lessons thereabout, which cover a full gamut of both comprehension at the word and sentence level. There's some computer and internet skills and digital skills that we're working on, as well as those that cover stories and text. All told, there's probably 30, 40 hours of content to move through these. It is adaptive, meaning that based on your performance within each lesson, we sort of move you up in challenge level or down to support you if you're facing difficulty. So what happens here is you log in, you select a lesson, say word parts, and you'll see these 2 agents. They're automatized. This is a teacher agent, and they actually are reading aloud to you. You're listening to them. And then a student agent, and the student agent is working along with you while you're doing these things. So you sort of take turns. It's set up so that the student always does better than the agent student cleverly, so that you always feel a sense of, well, at least I'm better than Jordan. Jordan's actually a little bit funny as we go along. And then there's feedback at every step of the way, both how you do when you're doing well, and this helps you to really get the direct instruction about what you're doing as well as practicing things. We have, as you see, a set of computer and internet sets of skills, in this case, working with online job applications. By the way, we have, in our new designs, you can either listen to the agents talking aloud, or you can read bubbles like this, where we supply it as a written sort of thing that would, for more advanced students, they may actually prefer at times to be reading the little bubbles of descriptions. And here you see we have a large set that work at the story and text level, working on different sets of skills that have been found to be strongly related to comprehension growth. We could show you so much more of that, but I'm going to have limited time, and I am getting closer to the end here. So please visit us at either our website or email us, and we'll provide more information there. And you see that covered a lot of the skills I mentioned. And now I'm going to give you something that's more of a classroom-based. It's a different project we're working on. I didn't mention there, we're working on it with adolescents right now, but I think it's perfectly applicable to adults as well. It's collaborative critical discussions. So you can call them critical discussions or argumentation. I know that individuals still have difficulty with the term argument. They think it means fighting. So critical discussions is also technically correct and doesn't, so you have to decide whether you're going to have individuals who are going to react negatively to the idea of persuasive argument. But argument or discussion is a social activity of dialogue between people who hold different points of view on a controversial issue. And when you get students doing this, whether in written or formalized form, they get audience awareness, sensitivity to alternate perspectives, a social model. And it's actually very supportive of writing. In fact, we're using this to help them develop writing skills. So it's bridging reading and writing. And it's not something that naturally develops. And I guess maybe I shouldn't have to tell, there's no reason to tell you this given where our society is right now. People critically discussing and coming to joint solutions has been a challenge for children and adults. So how does it work? It's, you know, it's not a debate. It's a slightly different thing. It's you introduce a controversial topic, but it could be a social issue or just a general problem. But there's legitimate arguments on both sides about how to solve it or how to approach it. And as an instructor, you have to decide your comfort level and your students' comfort level with how hot you want the topic to be. And I'll show you some examples that follow arranged there. If you want, you know, and again, I think it's just your choice. I think it's appropriate in some places to really take on important current controversial issues with your students. That's fine. In other cases, you might decide to take something that's a little less hot. So you read some background information on the topic and pro-con evidence, and I strongly recommend that you find some, but you also have your students use the internet or other things to source their own. That way they're getting the web and internet and digital skills. There should be no shortage of materials on either side that you'll be able to find on any topic whatsoever that you would choose, and that will give them multiple sources and different points of view. Then you pair students, and two of them take the same side to look at arguments, and two take the opposite side. And actually, the ideal way to do it is then they switch, and they also, so they each do both sides of the argument, and then they basically come up with a solution that takes the strongest and best. So it's not like the typical essay where everybody has to pick a side. You can pick a third alternative, or you can pick something towards the middle, which is really the way the world actually works sometimes. So it's I think, a better than this idea of debate, pick a side, you have to argue for it and defend it. And again, this is used not only for reading, but for writing. So here's some examples that we built back when we were doing this project. This one's about invasive species, and you know how those can infect an environment and how you can identify them, address them, and solve them. So it's not so much controversial as sort of, you know, environmental. Here's one that's, and these are sort of the cool topics, meaning cool in the sense that they're not current and hot and hotly debated. This one is basically there's controversy over who was the model for the Mona Lisa, and there's different sources, multiple sources written over the history of time. We've used this actually at the community college level quite effectively. Here's one that has to do, this is getting a little hotter. It's about immigration's clearly a hot issue currently. It was as well at the turn of the 19th century. And there were laws written, and then there were debates about it and all. And this actually takes you back in time to some of the both legal and social issues that people confronted there, frighteningly similar to today. We actually developed this before this issue became quite so prevalent in the US media. But there you go. Here's one that has to do with, again, environmental issues that are sort of local, like the destruction of an ecosystem. Here's one that's very local in a way. It's what should we do with a local plot? Should we put in a community garden or a playground? There's arguments and debates on either side. Sort of you can pick any local social issue on that regard. This one's just more informational, like, you know, why is there organic farming? What's its use? What's its value? What do you think? And then we had some on like alternative sources. So here's a software we've been developing to support this at a distance. Again, we actually developed this before we knew everybody was going to go home and work remotely from the pandemic, but turned out that we expected to do this inside classrooms, but it works either way. So basically here you read some of these background materials I've been talking, you introduce this idea of taking, you know, looking at both sides. Then you pair people. You might have noticed in the corner there, I just went from 4 people to 2 people. See, there was 4 people talking, introduced, and then 2 people pair up. And they take the pro side, the other 2 take the con side, and then they write these reasons and evidence for each. And then they send it to the other group and they say, do you have questions about this that you want to pose us? And then they send the questions, and you notice they could be chatting with each other as they could do this, both in text as well as in talking. And then they send it back to the original group, and the original group answers those questions and, you know, figures out how to respond to them. Then each group gets all the information from all these inputs and uses it to come up with a solution to the problem that they think sort of takes the strongest arguments of each and makes the best case for what would be the best path forward. And this, we use this all as an introduction to writing a critical, persuasive, or argumentative essay, which, again, counterclaim arguments are the hardest for all individuals to develop. And this process helps you to see the other point of view, both how to understand it and then how to create a legitimate, sensible, reasoned argument about it. So, not far off on my timing, I think, here, and I'm just about at the end. I just want to emphasize that, you know, comprehension, whether it's reading, writing, speaking, listening, it's a language skill. And so you should be comfortable, and especially in a world today where everything is being sent digitally, where we have transcriptions of text, where we have text to speech. You really want to be working multimodally for your reading development. Just continuing to help learners to focus themselves on the print enough to be fluent both in visual reading and listening. Vocabulary is a bridge between language and knowledge, right? Because it's both understanding the language as it's represented, and it's also about the content that you're learning. And of course, sort of there's an interaction between, you know, a little bit about something, then you can reason about it and go deeper into it. And then that reinforces your ability to read more and more deeper things and learn from what you read. So I hope I didn't shimmy around too much and that my speaking was clear enough for everybody, and I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll take any questions you have.